In this panel will participate Manuel Tovar Rivera, Minister of Foreign Trade of Costa Rica and President of the Costa Rica Foreign Trade Promoter. Laura Fernández, Chief Operating and Strategy Officer at Radius Global. Brando Benifei, Member of the European Parliament and President of the Delegation for Regulation with the United States. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here moderating this panel. Thank you for the introductions of the panelists as well. Minister Rivera could not be here with us today, but he was thoughtful and sent a video message capturing the themes of today's sessions, which we would like to share with you now.
It is a privilege to speak before you at this 2026 Digital LATAM Summit held in Madrid, a forum that captures one of the defining transformations of our era, the convergence of trade, digitalization, global value chains, and AI. Although I regret not being able to join you this time in person, I would like to share with you a few reflections. For over 3 decades, Costa Rica has pursued a clear and consistent strategy: openness as a pathway to development through trade liberalization, strategic attraction of FDI, and sustained investment in human capital and strong institutions. That has helped us transform our society and our economy. The results are clear. Today, our exports are balanced between goods and services, diversified and increasingly sophisticated. We supply advanced medical devices and semiconductors, and knowledge-intensive services. This diversification has not only allowed us to integrate into the global value chains, but to upgrade within them. Global value chains, however, are evolving. Geopolitical shifts, nearshoring trends, and supply chain reconfiguration are reshaping trade patterns. For Latin America, this is a strategic opportunity to attract higher quality investment and move up the value ladder. But openness alone is not enough. Trade policy must align with current and long-term structural trends such as digital transformation. Digitalization is redefining how value is created, crafted, and exchanged. It enhances productivity, strengthens resilience, and enables deeper integration into global markets. In Costa Rica, digital transformation complements trade openness through forward-looking agreements, such as the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, known as DIPA, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which promote, both of them, trusted data flows and modern digital trade frameworks. Artificial intelligence is accelerating this shift. The challenge before us is clear: to reduce regulatory fragmentation, foster interoperability, and build trusted-based governance frameworks that allow innovation to flourish while ensuring inclusion. For Latin America, this is not simply about adopting new technologies. It is about claiming our place at the center of the global digital economy. Costa Rica stands ready to work with our partners across the region and beyond to advance a more innovative, resilient, and inclusive trade agenda. Thank you very much.
Well, I would certainly give the minister a round of applause, even though he's not here, because I think, and I'm going to quote his last paragraph, for Latin America, this is not simply about adopting new technologies. It's about claiming our place at the center of the global economy. And I think that quote frames so many of the discussions that we've heard over the past day and even this morning, and brings to light the importance of how digital transformation can really help bring a country up the value chain in terms of trade policies. I think he's also left a very inspiring message and an offer of collaboration to all partnerships. He's not being exclusive in where he's looking to partner. I also just want to take a moment to note that it's not just about Costa Rica's success in digital transformation that has led to a cost-productive ecosystem to attract investment. It's about reliability of infrastructure. I think Costa Rica has taken great strides to build a very reliable electric grid over the past year and has enacted very sound cybersecurity policies and frameworks. And I think from an investment perspective, you have to look at that total cost of ownership, production time down or technology time down because of power or cyber disruptions are extremely disruptive. And I think that's something that we've touched on in a few other panels, but maybe we could pull a little bit on here as well. So panelists, we've heard yesterday and again this morning of this shift from globalism to regionalism, or even multi-regionalism if you look at different parts of the world, where trade and digital policy are being driven by security frameworks and shared values. From your unique vantage points, I would like each of you to tell me what you think are the most critical elements, whether it be data privacy, infrastructure security, regulatory transparency, anything else that should be addressed for harmonization across the Atlantic to ensure that the shared digital ecosystem that we've been talking about remains open, competitive, and resilient against global supply shocks and constraints. Brando, if you don't mind, we start with you.
Yes, well, I can bring to this discussion, first of all, the experience in dealing with all these topics with the US, but this can also be expanded with a broader relation also with Latin America and Caribbean. I think the first thing we need to look at is that we need to agree that we can disagree. And we should respect each other. I give you an example on a slightly different topic than maybe many that we have discussed today and we will discuss in this panel. But I've been dealing with the difficult discussion around freedom of expression. So the issue of management of misinformation or abuse of deepfakes, or the impact of social media on children. These kind of topics that are all very hot topics, but where we see different way forward on the two sides of the Atlantic looking at EU-US. Because we see some points of more convergence, for example, children. We see less convergence when we look at how we manage so-called hate speech on social media. You know all the debate about the Digital Services Act of the European Union and the clash we have with Trump administration on this. So I'm giving this example to say that we need to agree that we can disagree, and we need to find ways, as you said, to maintain anyway an open and compatible ecosystem that can innovate together, which means developing standards together, which means building projects together, trying to integrate more. And you have seen how, for example, on semiconductors supply chains, there are some important advancements, including EU, US, Japan. But I think that as I've been working a lot on the Mercosur agreement, when we look at advancement on trade between EU and Latin America and Caribbean, and some important Latin American countries, this issue of security of supply chains for innovation and digital can be a very important argument to advance cooperation between EU and Latin America. Also, I see common ambitions on decarbonization that can be a pathway of common work that can unite digital and environmental transitions. So there are many areas where we can work together, but my first point I go back to is that we need to understand that we need respect for each other, respect for our sovereignty, no colonialist attitudes or big power imposing its views on everyone else. These kind of situations that are there in the world, we need to manage them, need to be toned down, they need to be reduced so that we can build cooperation that can be accepted and can be supported by our peoples. Because one thing that unites all this space that we are talking about is that we have democracies with flaws, with problems, with contestations, with issues. But we want to keep an open society where we can discuss, we can have disagreements, but we can also build more resilient cooperations. And obviously this means also building frameworks that can create stability and a certainty for business investments. This is obviously very important.
Thank you for that, Brando. I'm going to turn to Laura now.
Thank you. So look, from our perspective, I believe that the key element should be harmonization across the digital infrastructure space. It is expected, of course, that digital transformation is one of the key differentiators in terms of competitive advantage, but we need to be very mindful that if that translates into, as one example, different technological choices, standards that are not compatible, and policies that start decoupling across jurisdictions, that may bring a little bit of uneven and fragmented progress. So currently, businesses do need reliable and fast connectivity to thrive, from small businesses relying on contactless payments to really large organizations that are cloud-based, embedded in their actual business model. So connectivity sits at the core of it all. Let me give you an example of the risk potentially that we could see if we start moving from globalism to regionalism or even nationalism, right? I'm currently based in the UK, so I will touch on an example just for the sake of this discussion. Post-Brexit, UK, there started to be a deviation from EU harmonized policies in some aspects in the digital space. A 2023 survey has shown that over 500,000 businesses starting to quote or state that inadequate digital infrastructure was holding them back to grow their business. And that is quite remarkable. It's 1 in 10 businesses. So while we need to ensure that a competitive advantage is not lost in the discussion, the fact that this has a direct impact in the way business is being conducted should be something that we need to start looking into and monitor more closely, I would say.
Thank you for that. And Laura, from Radius Global is an infrastructure investment company, and from your perspective as the COO and Chief Strategy Officer, a new title was and additional responsibilities bestowed upon you. To what extent do the current trends that you're seeing in terms of strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty potentially represent a challenge to the vision that your company is looking to do?
No, that's a very good question. Radius Global Infrastructure, it's a US-based company, but we operate globally across 23 markets, from North America to Europe, Latin America, and Australia. We invest in mission-critical digital infrastructure, specifically passive investors in the real estate interest of critical digital infrastructure. And by that I mean from ground leases to towers to distributed antenna systems, thus fiber aggregation points and data centers. So across the whole sub-asset class within digital infra. And what we have been, as active investors, we are actually backed by a European a private equity firm, a Swedish one, and also by a Canadian public pension fund. So that's quite an interesting combination of sponsors that enable us to look globally for where to deploy our capital. We have deployed year to date more than 3 billion of capital across all these countries. So when it comes to your specific question, what I see is that there is a real need to ensure that we have a common framework to have some long-term certainty before we deploy. These capital deployments tend to be long-term returns. We look at return periods of, in some instances, more than 50 years. So the framework does matter. And these are the challenges that we are actually seeing, how to ensure that where we believe there's not only a good return on investment, but we bring some benefits to the communities we operate in, and we are happy to touch on that specifically for LATAM. We need to have the right environment to operate long-term. As one example, recently, in Europe, one of our sponsors, EQT, was blocked from acquiring ground infrastructure of a satellite operator, Eutelsat, I think it was, and that happened on the back of citing that this was a critical infrastructure for the country. The approach we take from an investor perspective is quite collaborative. That means that as passive investors, we allow network operators to have full control of the active equipment, meaning that they can deploy, maintain, and upgrade for the long run. So the success of the operator is our success. And I think that the challenge is trying to find that balance right. For me, excluding capital doesn't equate to the fact that you lose digital sovereignty in terms of, well, we keep it just a national level. There is a way to do it in which partnership approach will benefit everyone.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I would love to chat with you more about the satellite example later. Brando, you've been a chief architect of the EU AI Act, and we heard in Minister Rivera's commentary how AI is accelerating the disruptive order that is going to require regulatory harmonization, interoperability of networks, and trust-based governance as well. How can we ensure that frameworks that are being discussed and developed for AI don't hinder those desired outcomes?
Well, this is an issue that we get in general for every regulation that deals with the market, because also the European AI Act is in fact a market regulation regarding product safety, in fact. So I think that we need to try to find the common grounds. I come back from India AI Summit just a few days ago. I was there participating, and the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, was so clear in saying that we cannot accept a world where AI-generated content is becoming undistinguishable from reality, and it's not recognizable as such because there is no transparency on the synthetic origin of the content. This is a technical challenge, but in fact we are working on it. We are working on it in Europe, but also with the companies, but also this is one of the terrain where with US we have a space. And next week I will meet with parliamentarians from Brazil that are working on this. Also, President Lula was there at the AI Summit, and there were other leaders and ministers from all Latin America. Just because there are issues where I already see convergence. And then it's important that where we maybe have a different level, for example, of interest in understanding the quality of or appropriateness of data used to train a certain system, we find ways so that standards are compatible. I think we cannot get the same kind of regulation everywhere. This is impossible. But we need to see what we can decide at a more international level so that it can be more stable and certain for global investors, and where we will need some specific choices, but maybe trying to have similar approaches. I give you one example. In fact, the approach of a risk-based approach that then distinguish from non-risky use cases and moderate risks or more risky use cases can make it easier to actually not over-regulate where it's not needed, where there are no human rights involved, where there are no risks for people. We need to be clear on this. In fact, in this moment with the digital omnibus and with guidelines on the AI Act specifically, we are trying to advance this work of clarifying and making clearer boundaries. I think this is very important for those that want to invest. And I think that we need to overcome challenges where we have them. I think it's the same in this sense for Latin American countries, that we have, like in Europe, only a limited access to a certain level of investment on startups that want to scale. So now there is so much flux going to the US for that, and it's linked to the level of investment available. And also we need to make our talent be able to work in our places, so that not all the Latin American or European talent goes to the US because of better conditions for how they are paid or how they can develop their own company. For example, Europe, which is not a single state, is 27 member states, is now developing a new extra regime for companies, the so-called 28 regime, the EU Inc., to simplify entering into the market for companies in Europe. And I know this is a very important step. I'm saying that because Latin America is having some form of coordination and integration, but much more limited than the EU. And I think that as we move to a world that is less global and more regionally integrated, in fact, I think that doing more regional integration of the markets, of the way we do things, is something that as politicians, as representatives, we should encourage, we should support, because unfortunately, I say unfortunately, the more globalistic system is under extreme friction, tension, and difficulty. Think of the difficulty of the UN, although ITU, for example, still plays a crucial role in the sector we are discussing in these days. And we still need a broader international law context, but more integration between regions, so to simplify also dialogue, I think is very important. So I think that EU should do more in this sense, but also Latin America can do more. Otherwise, it's obvious for me that there are superpowers like US, China. They are Unitarian states. US is federal, but they are like that. In India, I come back from India. It's again a very interesting example of how very different peoples, very different histories, very different languages united. So I think as a politician, this is really a matter of reflection and of how we can advance also to solve issues that we are being discussed.
And then just going back to some of your comments, we heard on day one from the opening about some of this amazing transformation that's happening here in Spain in terms of their movement from to being startups in the ecosystem and kind of, drivers of, technology that's emerging. So it is, to your point, taking place in different areas and different environments. So.
Yeah, I can just speak quickly on the Spain example, because, for example, Spain on the AI Act has taken, I think, an intelligent move, creating one authority that in a Unitarian way deals with the implementation. While you have countries like not only Italy, my own country, but Germany, for example, that are having a much messier implementation approach in terms of national authorities. So when you have regulation that are always creating some burdens for in this case, the business sector, you can look at them, you can modify them, you can reduce them, but also how you actually apply them counts. And I think Spain is taking a smart way forward. Also, the work that is being doing on the sandboxes is extremely interesting.
Thank you. Laura, getting back to, and I'm trying to include Minister Rivera here, even because he was kind enough to send the wonderful remarks. His spirit is here with us. He discussed the 30-year evolution of digital transformation in Costa Rica and how it enabled the environment that he's seeing now be undertaken. What advice would you give to policymakers, regulators, ministers here in the audience who also are striving to create that type of environment in their countries and open it up to capital investment and more infrastructure so that they can go on that path?
I think that from an investor perspective, it's quite relevant to have an understanding and a regulatory and policy environment that can increase predictability, right? With that environment, capital flows, this deployment of digital infrastructure is very capital intensive, and it cannot be achieved by one stakeholder. This really requires a collaborative approach, a multi-stakeholder approach, I would say, from policymakers to investors to technology companies, and including the communities where we are deploying this digital infrastructure. We are hearing in some areas across the world this boom in data center rapid deployment, bringing, of course, issues from power availability, water availability. In some instances, we've seen this in some regions in the US as well. So communities are impacted by this. So it requires a multi-stakeholder approach. From an investor perspective, the more harmonized and forward-looking visibility, the better, because that will, of course, reduce risk and increase confidence to deploy capital at scale in the regions that actually need it the most. As one example, we can touch on the EU. A more harmonized approach should be a tier 1 capital destination, and there was a EY attractiveness survey quoting that 70% of US investors were looking at Europe as potential growth market. However, as part of the top 3 elements that they look into is the availability and the resilience of the digital infrastructure in place before deploying capital. So this is quite interesting. Then when we move to LATAM, it's a completely different context, right? We have a region that, from an even geographical perspective, is quite complex and diverse, and this was touched on in the previous panel. It was discussed. And that differences require a more complex coordination, I would say. The digital divide is there. We're here talking about AI, but numbers show that almost shy of 1 billion individuals across the globe don't have even access to electricity, right? So to put things into context. So in LATAM, it's critical. It's not only a business imperative, it's a strategic imperative to get this right, to connect the unconnected. 5G is at the early stages of deployment. Equally, that's the status when it comes to fiber deployment, and we need reliable, redundant, and fast low latency networks for economies to thrive. So to policymakers, for me, making sure that we work in a more coordinated manner to support not only private funds to deploy capital. There are many instances in which, because of the scale, you need private-public cooperation as well, right? It's in the interest of the nations. So I think that my advice would be make sure that everyone is included in the conversation, because it's not one win, another lose. We will all win if we get it right, and across the globe, really.
That was free advice, everyone, so yeah, we're not going to bill you for that. I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's privilege and recognize that Brando is not only a member of the European Parliament, he is the chair for the relations between the EU and the United States of America. And Brando, we've talked about some of the themes where we need to make sure that we're not diverging from each other, but I want to ask you, in my role at the FCC and the head of the International Bureau, I take an active role in the Latin America region, the Caribbean, in terms of infrastructure and spectrum issues, and more broadly, trusted network issues. What can the EU and the United States do together and collaborate to help move, share lessons or do projects in the regions that I've just described?
Well, I think that already a lot is happening outside of the spotlight. I mean, the spotlight is of a bit of theatrics from both sides. But I think a lot of things are already happening. In fact, we are working on different projects, and I think that also the present turmoil around the trade relations can be stabilized, maybe not overcome, but stabilized, which is the most important thing, because as it was said, for the digital infrastructure, we need a lot of capital. And it's interesting, I would say it could be counterintuitive compared to other factors that instead, as you were saying, the availability of quality digital infrastructure is really among the top necessities for investors. And so this is also important for this region. And I think that EU and US can work together on this simply for one simple fact, that the trade relations, but also the interaction economically that is done between our companies that deal in the sector and can work together also in Latin America and Caribbean is already very high. And in fact, is the reason why conflicts can get to a certain level, but probably then they have to scale back because markets react and expectations are instead that we work together. And this is what we are working for. More cooperation, less confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So as we wrap up, I think we've heard that a very clear message and vision from the minister, highlighting an example of digital transformation in one country and how it has enabled a very productive environment for investments and global trade. Great example of nearshoring in our framing. We've heard how private investments will naturally flow to areas where there's the right conditions in the market. And as regulators and policymakers, it's important to take some of those considerations that Laura addressed. And we heard how the EU is playing a significant role itself in Latin America and the Caribbean in trying to form an alliance and partnership of common framework principles that will allow businesses to flourish. And we have heard hope that there is still opportunities between the United States and the EU to further our relationships, both here and globally. So I want to thank these expert panelists, including the minister from Costa Rica, for their wonderful examples, and really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.